For 30 years, we at the FCJ Refugee Center have been walking with uprooted people. We've remained unwavering and relentless in our commitment to walk with people who have faced and continue to experience exclusion, marginalization, and oppression. Today and every day, we stand in solidarity with Indigenous communities across this country. Canada's history begins with the colonization of Indigenous land, upon which we have built a foundation of false hopes and empty promises to all First Nations people. While our country mourns together over the ongoing discoverings of the remains of Indigenous children on multiple sites of residential schools, we must not forget that anti-Indigenous racism and prejudice is not just in Canada's past, it is very much a part of our society today. While this may be shocking to some, to far too many others, it is a daily reminder of Canada's gross mistreatment, abuse, and exploitation of Indigenous peoples, of their land and their communities. We stand in grief and solidarity with the Indigenous peoples across Canada who were forcibly sent to residential schools. We stand with them as they face the trauma caused by the Church and the Canadian government alike through residential schools and many other forms of systematic and ongoing racism. We acknowledge the impact that colonialism and systemic racism and violence have on members of this community. Although many in our community have been displaced by similar forces of racism, neocolonialism, the transatlantic slave trade, the rise of fascist movements, and unfettered commercial exploitation in countries of origin, we recognize that our organization is not free of racism and pledge to take an active part in decolonization and reconciliation. We recognize how we have profited from Canada's colonialism, and we at the FCJ Refugee Center would like to acknowledge the land on which its establishment is housed and where staff, volunteer, members, and we today gather. This land is the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nations. We urge the Canadian government to continue to investigate every single residential school burial site and bring justice to the families. Our elected officials must work with Indigenous leaders, allow room for self-autonomy, and must always prioritize the best interest of Indigenous children and their communities. As a community, we must also educate ourselves with the calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in order to create change and work with Indigenous communities. This time demands from us thoughtful consideration of the findings of the Truth and Reconciliation Report. We must demand action from our elected officials. We must demand that all children are taught the true history of the land upon which we live. We commit ourselves to participate in active reflection and reconciliation of the true and terrible foundation upon which Canada was built, on stolen land, with stolen sons and daughters. As we approach the first National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, we commit unwavering support and solidarity. Together, we will reflect, we will continue to learn, and we will teach our sons and daughters the truth of our history so it shall never be repeated again. We honor the victims, survivors, and all families impacted by the trauma inflicted upon generations of Indigenous communities through action, not simply words. Please join us and join our calls to action.